what we're going to do today's video is something that's been highly requested, which is widget to blueprint to widget communication. So essentially going from the widget to talk to a blueprint to get the blueprint to talk to the widget to get it to do something. It sounds super complicated. It's not, but it is going to take a little bit to go through. So what I recommend doing for this video is watching through once before you actually try and follow along. Just because if you understand the logic, you're going to be able to implement this into your own things, which will be super helpful for everyone. So the first thing we're going to do is jump into the template that we've got going. And we're going to find a blank area to work with, just so we've got somewhere to place our actors and scenes. And I think what we're going to do for this video is we'll make a light that we can turn on and off, and maybe even change the brightness of the light in it. So we're going to cover a lot, but it allows us to have a widget that we can turn buttons on and off and then communicate with the light. So what we'll do is we'll start by creating a new folder. Now I'm going to call this widget blueprint communication, and then we can jump right in here. So there's two ways to do blueprint communication, or once we start coding it, which is we could cast from our widget to our actor, or we can use interfaces. If you've been on the channel before and you've had a look through some of the other videos, you'll know that I really prefer using interfaces just because they're so versatile. So that's what we're going to do in here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to go to blueprints. We'll go to blueprint interface and we're going to go, we'll do BPI underscore widget communication. Hopefully I've spelled that right. And now in here, when we want to talk between our widgets, so our blueprints, we can just add an event and then we can have that go back and forth. The next thing we need to do is create an actor. So we're going to do a blueprint class. And we'll do an actor. We'll do BP underscore, let's call this BP underscore widget, because we'll take this the next step further and we'll have this talk to another item in the scene. So we'll be able to set it. So this will be a reusable blueprint, and we'll have it so it controls the lights. So what we'll do is, with that selected, or with that created, we then need to create our user interface and create our widget blueprint. So this is going to have our buttons, so turn the light on, off, dim the light, make the light brighter. And we'll call this widget blueprint underscore, we'll call this light switch, because that's essentially what it's going to be. Excellent. So we've got the three main components that we need. We'll do a save all. And the first thing we're going to do is actually we'll create our widget. So I won't be covering how to design any widgets in this one. We're just going to set up a simple one. And then later on in another video, we'll cover how we can bring our own artwork in and make it that way. So the first thing we need to do is add a button. So we're just going to drag and drop this into the scene. And I'm going to place a text on this just so we know what this button does. And if we select our button, I'm going to go size to content, you'll see it automatically matches the scale. And I'm just going to call this, we'll call this light switch, so we know if it's on or off. And what I want to do is add another button, call this brightness. So what we'll do is we'll make this other button, we'll add the text, and I'm going to call this increase brightness. Increase brightness, and we'll set this to centered. And for the button, we're just going to set this to size to content again. And we're not too worried about making this look nice at the minute. It's just for a rough example. So we'll drag the text in. We'll do essentially the same thing. And we'll call this decrease brightness. Excellent. So now we've got three buttons that we can use. And just to make this easier for us, we might as well rename our buttons themselves. So I normally do this BTN for button, and then light switch, BTN. Let's just do brightness up and then brightness down. I realize I spelled that wrong. It's a good job you're not here for my spelling, that's for sure. So what we need to do now is actually select our buttons and make sure they appear in the center of the screen. So this is just be a rough overview of anchors, but if you don't know what they are, they essentially pin these buttons to a location on your monitor rather than this window here, because this is a representation of our monitor. So if it was so currently it's pinned to the top left. What that means is this button would scale and stay that distance from the top left of my monitor. So no matter whereabouts I rescale my screen, it'll stay there. So one monitor could have it about there in relation, and the other one could be down here. It's 4K, 2K, anything like that, it's going to change. So what we need to do is set this ideally to the center of our screen. And I find this is best when working with a widget component, which we'll do in a bit with the actual actor. If you don't set these to the center of the screen, they often move around all over the place. So let's actually just place these underneath each other, make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to make sure these are all set to center anchors, which they are, which is excellent. And now we can actually see these in the screen. So we won't do any coding yet. So we'll jump back to our motion controller or our main map. And you'll see in here, we've got the three still. We're going to go into our BP widget because this is what we're going to use to display our widget component, especially in VR or within the scene. And we're going to go to add component and we're going to search widget. So you'll see nothing actually happened. We have a component and a transform, which is exactly what we're after. And now what we can do is on the right hand side, we have widget class. We can go to the drop down and we can search for our light widget. So in here, it's WB for widget blueprint, light switch. And you'll see once we select that, it comes in and it's absolutely huge. So resolution is actually based on the widget itself and the amount of screen space it takes up. So if we scale these up, it'll become crisper. And now that we actually have our widget in there, we're actually going to use this draw size. So you'll see here, we've got two values. And if we actually bring these down, you'll see it starts clipping into our widget. And what we want to do is make it just a little bit bigger than our widget itself. And you can do this by just keep going until it starts cropping something off. It'll be fine. What this does is it'll be where our interaction collides. So anything behind this transparency, essentially, we won't be able to interact with. So it's just something to keep in mind. Another thing to do is if you want to, you do have the option to actually change the geometry mode. So you see at the minute, it's a plane, so it's just flat. We can actually change this to cylinder and then control how much curve we have using the cylinder angle. I don't normally use this because it just seems a little bit off, but for now, we're just going to leave it as it is. So if we hit compile and save and jump back over to our map, we can actually bring this in and place it in our scene. And you'll see it's quite big. So we'll drag this around or we'll rotate it. And you can see there where the invisible box is just a little bit bigger. So that's fine for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change the scale of this to 0.2. Actually, I'm going to change the scale of this to 0.5. And then just place it against our wall. And now if we jump into it, you'll see that we can move over to our widget. And since we've already got the interaction set up, we can actually press these buttons now. So these exist in our scene or in our world, which is exactly what we're after. If you're not sure how to set up the interactions, so using the trigger, I'll link a video in the top right. So you'll be able to head on over and check that out. Excellent. So now we have our widget. We need to control something with it, essentially. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring a light into our scene and we'll place it next to it. Actually, what we'll do is we'll place a couple just so you can see how we can make this work with a few different objects. Excellent. So they're set to stationary. And now what we need to do is essentially tell our light which ones to communicate with. So if you've used widgets before, you'll know that it's quite difficult to pin or get references to actors. So if we do variable and then actor, object, and then compile, so you'll see that we can't actually select any actors in our scene. And even if we go to our blueprint, which contains our widget, we can't actually select any actors from here either, which makes this quite difficult because we need our widget to turn that light on or off, which is where the difficulty comes in, and we need to set the information in the actor and then send it to our light switch to actually make it do stuff. So I'm going to delete that just so we don't get too confused. And the first thing we're going to do is go back to our blueprint widget, because in here we're going to need a reference to those lights that are in our scene. So we're going to do that by going to variables. We're going to hit actor, or we're going to hit plus, and then we're going to set this to lights because this is going to be a light switch specific item. And then search actor and we'll do object reference. And we hit compile and save. You can see we have the same thing, but we can make this public. So now if we compile and save and we go back to our map, we can actually select one of these lights from our scene and we can reference it. And as mentioned before, we can do this with all three. All we've got to do is go to our BP widget, the room widget, and then set our actor to an array. We'll hit compile and save. And now if we go back to the map, we can select multiple lights to do the same thing and control each one. So let's hit save. And what I realized is the BP widget might not be best to be called that. So I'm going to rename this to BP underscore, let's call this BP underscore light switch. So BP underscore light switch. And we'll keep that. So we know we can drag this into the scene and we can control any lights with it that we select from it. So at the minute we've got all three. But if we jump back into our BP lights, you'll see that we're actually doing nothing to them. There's no code to control it. So I'm going to start by deleting all of these nodes. Click compile and save. So in our BP light switch, we're going to need some events to control what our lights do. And the first thing we need to do actually is get our lights and drag them into the scene. Do a get. And then because this is an array specifically, we're going to do a for each. And this will help us cycle through each one of the lights that we have selected. If you just have a single light, then you don't need to worry about doing this. It's just a matter of changing this back and then just keeping the main reference, which we're going to hook up out of this. So we're actually going to do, and what we're going to do is we're going to drag off array element and we'll do set actor hidden in game. And we'll plug this into our loop body. So now we've got a bool that we can turn on and off. But the thing that we're missing is our custom event. And we need to do that inside of our blueprint interface. So we're going to go to motion controller. We'll open up our interface. And you see here it's got a new function. We're just going to right click and we're going to rename this turn light on / off. And we're good to go. So now with our function / event in there, we can hit compile. And we can add an input, and this is going to be a boolean, and this is going to be a boolean for on or off. So we'll do turn light on / off, and hit compile and save. And now if we jump over to our light switch, we can actually add our interface to the actor. So we're going to go class settings. Excellent. So with our class settings open, we can go to add, and we can look for widget communication. We're going to select that one, and you'll see it's the right one because we have our function or event that we can clearly see. I'm going to compile just so it's there. Now in the event graph, we can right click and we can search event, turn light on or off. We can plug this into our for each loop and we can plug our bool directly into new or hidden. They compile and save. And if we check our widget communication, we can check that our default value is off. So the light will start off. And then once it's activated, it will be set to true. This is important for the order that we do things in, because we also need to set the lights in the scene specific type. So what I would prefer to do is, because I know the lights in the scene will be on by default, is in our widget communication is set this to true, because we're going to set that again afterwards. So by default, the lights are on, which means our bool should be true. So when we fire this, it will turn to false and then they'll be hidden. And now we actually have our first reason to communicate with our blueprint. So first thing we're going to do is open up our WB light switch, and you'll see that we've got our designer open. So we need to go to our graph, and I'm actually going to delete all of this here and then compile and save. And because this is our light switch, we're going to select our button light switch. And we'll do on clicked. So when we click it, we actually turn it on or off. And what we do from here is we just select it and we'll drag off and we'll do a flip flop. And if you remember, by default, our lights are on, which means the first time this fires, A will fire, which means this needs to be false. So the output from this needs to be false. But we have no reference to our light to point to where our event is. So you'll see that we go to our BP light switch again, we drag off here and we'll do turn light on or off message, we need a target. We can't fire an actor unless we know what the target is. And to do that, we actually need to create the target itself, which is an actor. So we're going to right click and promote a variable. You see it comes in as an object, which is not right. So we'll change this to actor. We'll do object reference, change variable type, which is excellent. And we're going to rename this to our BP light switch. So BP underscore light switch. And now we're good to go. And you'll see that the issue is we still can't select our light switch. So this widget doesn't know how to talk to this switch to then fire our information. This is where it starts getting a little bit confusing, but hopefully we can make this work. And now what we're going to do is we're going to compile, and we actually need to set this to false. So when we first press the button, it'll turn the lights off because they're on by default. And we'll do a Control W with that node selected just to turn them back on. And you'll see that we now have this going. If we test this, it's not going to work, but I'm going to do it so I can show you why. So we jump over, we go to our light switch. You'll see that we select the button, but nothing actually happens. Our lights don't do anything. This is where our communication between both happens. And we need to set the information in this light switch. And to do that, we can go to BP underscore light switch. And you could do this in the construction script, so it would happen immediately when you're viewing the editor. But because you can't really interact with it without simulating, we don't need to worry about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do an event on begin play. So we'll do begin play. There it is. Event begin play. And we're now going to set the information in our light switch widget. And to do that, we need to cast to it. So we can drag off our custom event and we'll do cast to WB light switch, which is exactly what we're after. And in here, we'll do set BP light switch. We'll plug that into there. And you'll see that we actually have this set up. If we compile now, it's going to error out because we're not pointing at a specific light switch. This blueprint doesn't know where to go or where to look at to set this information. So to do that, we just need to reference our widget. So we drag that in and we're going to drag off this and we'll do get user widget or user object. And then we just plug that into our actual object. And now if we compile and save, we're setting this widget. But at the minute, we're setting it to nothing. And we need it to be essentially ourselves. So we can drag off this. We'll do self and get reference to self. So on begin play, or the event begin play, we set our light switch variable to this information. File save. So now this will actually point towards that blueprint and then go back. So hopefully this is making sense. We have our blueprint talk to our widget, and then our widget talks back to our blueprint. It's entirely possible to have it so all the information is probably inside the widget, but it just makes it a little bit more complicated in general. And now if we are to jump back into the scene, and this is set up correctly, we should be able to turn our lights on or off. So if we go over and then we hit our light switch, we'll see that it takes one click and then turns them off and then turns them back on, which means I got the bool wrong. So if we go back to our light switch widget and then we select these two the other way around, they compile and play. We can then select our light switch and it turns off and then turns back on. But the benefit of this blueprint is if we do this now and we just select our widget, so this hasn't updated the name from BP light switch, so let's delete this in the scene and we'll drag a new one in and we'll scale this back down again just to 0.5. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this over to the other side. So we've got two versions of the light switch. So this version will control these three lights. And then we're going to duplicate these. We'll move them up. We'll set them to movable just so we can actually keep working with them. And now from this switch, we're going to select the three lights. And we'll control these ones. Hit compile and save. And if I don't forget to do it, we need to add the bottom lights to our array as well. So we'll do that. save, and we'll jump back in. So this switch can turn the bottom lights off and then back on. And then this switch over here can turn these lights on and back off, or on and off as well. So what we've done here is essentially we've created one blueprint type that can be reused within different levels to turn different lights on and off. So it's a reusable blueprint that you don't have to create every single time you need to turn lights on and off. But the thing is, I'm using this as an example for lights, but it could be done for anything. So that light switch could be replaced with a door as long as the event works. So that's just something to keep in mind. But what we did was we'll cover this a little bit more. I'm going to hit yes to all, and we'll do a file save all. And now we'll increase and decrease the brightness, just to show you how we can communicate a little bit more. So if we select this, you'll see we have our light turn on and off. And what we need to do is go back to our interface, and we're going to add increased brightness and a decreased brightness. And now back in our BP light switch, we can set this back up. So we'll hit compile, just so it updates our events. So event brightness. Also, we'll do increase brightness first, and then we'll do event decrease brightness. And we can do the same thing with our for loop. Control C, Control V. And we'll plug this into our events. And we need this for each one, so we'll duplicate it as such. And now what we can do is we can set our intensity. Okay, so I've actually made a mistake by selecting variable type actor. And what we need to do is, to be able to get access to the intensity through our for each loop, we need to change this to light component. Because if we don't, what we then need to do is get our array element. We then have to cast to the actual light. So we'll cast to light. And then from here, we can then set intensity for the light component, but that's a bit convoluted for what we need. So I'd rather, because I have this selected as an actor type, so we can select basically all the lights within the scene, that causes an issue where I can't just drag off the array element and do set intensity. As you'll see that it doesn't show up. And the way that we could do this is to cast to, and then we'll do cast to light. Then we can set this to set intensity for the light component. And now we can actually set the intensity to a chosen value. But the thing is, we don't really want to cast. It's not going to be very good for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our actor type to specifically look for point lights, because that's going to make it much easier and it will remove the cast. So I'm going to fix my mistake by selecting our actor, and I'm going to search for point light, object reference, and then change variable type. And you'll see that it doesn't actually update anything, but if we hit compile and save and drag off and do set intensity, but you'll see that it doesn't update. That's because there's a little bug where it's saying that these are the same. And I'm going to actually change all of the for each loops. So I'm going to rebring those in and then hook these back up. And you'll see now that if we actually drag off this array pin, we can do set intensity for light component, which means we now don't need to cast between these, which is pretty good for performance. It just means I messed up in the first place. So we'll do for each loop, plug that in here, and we'll do set intensity again for light component, because that's what it is. And now we can choose whether we want to set the light intensity here or in our widget. And for this, to keep our essentially light switch as simple as possible, I would actually recommend putting this in the light switch itself. So we need to set the intensity. We could cast to the light switch and then set the intensity in there and then have a reference to it. But as it is, we want to avoid using the casts. So I'm going to select our interface, and in our increase brightness, I'm going to select this and set float to increase brightness. And then I'm going to do the same thing for our input, and we'll just do decrease brightness. Hit compile and save. And now in our light switch, we can actually connect these up to control them. So now everything else that we need to do is going to be done through the light switch itself using the buttons. So brightness down, we're going to select our button. We'll do unclicked. And you'll see that we can drag off and we can do unclicked, and then we'll do the same thing for brightness up, unclicked, so we've got both references, and we'll drag in a reference to our actor. So we're going to point towards our light switch. So we'll do increase brightness. So we're going to drag off and we'll do increase brightness message. So that'll be brightness up. And then we'll do decrease brightness message. And we'll put these the other way around because it just makes a little bit more sense logically. And now our increase brightness, if we set this to something silly like 50, and then our decrease brightness to something silly like 5, we should see these change on their brightness. So if we jump in, compile and save, and we move over to our light switch, and you'll see that didn't work because when I changed the actor type from actor to point light, I forgot to update the references. So we just need to hit 3, select our blueprints, compile and save. And now if we jump in and test, you'll see that we can still turn our lights on and off, but we can actually change the brightness of our lights. So that's essentially one way that we can communicate between widgets. So as a breakdown, what we're doing is we've got 3 widgets. We've got 3 components. So we have our blueprint interface. We then have our actor, which contains our widget so we can see it in the real world. And then we have our widget itself, which has most of the logic in it. What we're really doing is just talking between the two of these, so the actor and the widget. So if we open up our actor, when we first start, we get a reference to our widget through our widget class, and then we cast to the widget itself, so directly to the light switch, where we tell it that this is the actor that you're talking to. So we set the information in here, which is just an actor. So we can then point this actor towards our events, which are in the blueprint itself. And that's basically it. It's quite a confusing thing to understand, but ideally all you really need to know is if you've got any buttons and you want them to talk to something else, you create an interface for the middleman and the communication between them. And then on the start, for the actor, you just tell the widget where you want it to look at or where you want to talk to, which is why we get a reference to our widget and we set the actor as self. And then you can actually control everything within the widget. So it's a bit of a mix between locations, but what that lets you do is adds more logic in the same place that will control more of these actors. And the idea is to make it so, let's say we duplicate this widget across, and then we want it to, I don't know, we've got different lights in a different room that we want to turn on and off. We can actually tell the second light switch to talk only to those lights. So we can press play, and now we can actually turn these light switches on and off, and we can increase and decrease the brightness. So we'll turn those off for now. And now we can actually have these ones increase and decrease separately and be controlled in a different way. So that's essentially, we've got one actor that we can place anywhere in the scene as many times as we want and have it communicate with different things to do different things essentially. So I know this has been a long one and has probably been a little bit more confusing than normal, but hopefully this has given you an idea of how you can actually have widgets in your scene talk to other widgets and do different things. So if this one actually helped and it was pretty good for you guys, then please let me know. I'm going to do a lot more widget stuff in the future, but I thought this was one of the best ones to jump into just so you can understand how to talk between different things. And it's just good to know. In the next video, what we'll do is we will check out how we can communicate with the player to turn the hand interactions on or off. So you can choose whether you want to be right-handed or left-handed. But if you understand this and you've got the hang of it, then that should be a walk in the park. It's just communicating with a different actor. But I think I've went on long enough. Big thank you to everyone on Patreon for supporting this channel. If you want access to this file, it will be uploaded as soon as this video is live. So you'll be able to jump in, download, and see what this is like. And until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.